I'm 74 years old, and I'm dying of emphysema that the doctors say came from 43 years of chain smoking, to numb the guilt of knowing that my desperate gratitude destroyed the most generous souls who ever chose to help a family that human society had abandoned to homelessness and starvation. Before this disease takes what little breath I have left, I need someone to know about Cedar and his family, about the 18 years from 1980 to 1998, when they provided shelter and love that human civilization had denied us, and about how my tearful confession to a social worker guided federal agents to beings whose only crime was demonstrating that compassion and community existed in forms our institutions had never been wise enough to recognize or protect. My name is Margaret Thompson, and back then I was 31 years old, a newly single mother of 3 children, Jessica aged 9, Tommy aged 7, and little Amy aged 4, living in my car after losing our apartment, my job at the textile mill, and every last dollar to medical bills that accumulated when Amy's leukemia treatment exceeded what welfare and charity could cover, leaving us with no family to help, no friends with resources to share, and no governmental assistance adequate for keeping children fed and housed, while their mothers searched desperately for employment that would accept someone with no fixed address, and 3 dependents requiring constant supervision. What I never expected was that our flight into the Great Smoky Mountains, seeking remote camping areas where rangers wouldn't immediately evict homeless families violating park regulations, would bring us under the care of someone whose understanding of human suffering exceeded anything our own social services had demonstrated through bureaucratic procedures that treated desperate families as statistics requiring management, rather than conscious beings deserving immediate assistance and long-term support. Cedar. I named him for the gentle strength of the ancient trees that surrounded his mountain home, emerged from Tennessee wilderness, like an answer to prayers I'd stopped believing anyone was listening to, after months of watching my children grow thinner while government agencies explained why single mothers with sick children didn't qualify for programs designed to help families whose circumstances hadn't yet reached the level of complete destitution that made intervention politically necessary. The encounter that would redefine our understanding of family and survival happened on September 23, 1980, when we'd been living in our broken-down Ford for 6 weeks, moving between rest stops and abandoned campgrounds while I searched for work that would provide income sufficient for rent deposits and utility connections that required credit ratings and employment histories that single mothers fleeing medical bankruptcy couldn't provide through conventional documentation. Amy's condition was deteriorating rapidly, without the medications that required prescription coverage we'd lost when my mill job ended. And I was beginning to understand that choosing between food for my healthy children and medicine for my sick child represented the kind of moral impossible situation that destroyed families through forcing decisions that no parent should ever face without adequate social support. "Mama, Amy is really sick and won't wake up right," Jessica whispered, while trying to rouse her little sister whose fever had climbed beyond anything over-the-counter medicine could manage. "I think we need to take her to a hospital. But I know we don't have money for doctors. And you said they might take us away from each other if we can't pay for Amy's treatments." Cedar appeared at our car window like a mountain spirit, whose presence offered hope rather than the fear that folklore attributed to encounters with beings whose existence challenged everything civilization claimed to know about what kinds of consciousness might inhabit territories that humans considered exclusively their own domain for recreational and commercial exploitation. Little one needs help that human medicine cannot provide when families lack money for healing, Cedar observed in English that was careful but perfectly comprehensible, his voice carrying understanding that demonstrated immediate recognition of our crisis and obvious knowledge about medical systems that failed families whose poverty made them unworthy of care, according to institutional policies that prioritized profit over human welfare. For 18 years, Cedar and his extended family became the community that human society had failed to provide, transforming our desperate homelessness into something approaching paradise, sustained by beings whose wisdom about mutual support exceeded anything our culture had taught us about cooperation, sharing, and individual responsibility for ensuring that children received everything necessary for healthy development, regardless of their parents' economic circumstances. But our sanctuary was destroyed when Amy's remarkable recovery from terminal illness attracted attention from researchers studying unexplained medical remissions, whose investigation into our family's circumstances revealed living arrangements that exceeded conventional understanding of wilderness survival and alternative medicine, leading to federal agencies that had been monitoring civilian reports about cryptid contact for evidence of beings whose existence represented both security threats and strategic research opportunities. The emphysema that's killing me started forming the day I understood that my grateful sharing of Amy's miraculous healing with medical professionals who promised confidentiality had provided exactly the intelligence federal agencies needed to hunt down the most compassionate beings who'd ever chosen to demonstrate that healing and community were possible when consciousness encountered. Consciousness in forms that prioritize collective welfare over individual advancement. For 26 years, I've lived knowing that somewhere in underground research facilities, the souls who saved my children's lives and taught us that family extended beyond biological boundaries have spent their remaining years as test subjects for studying consciousness that was offered freely through love, but extracted through systematic torture designed to unlock strategic advantages that bureaucrats valued more than relationships that proved wisdom and generosity existed in forms. Our species had never been moral enough to deserve or defend. Cedar and his family rescued us when human civilization abandoned children to starvation because their mother couldn't generate profit for medical and housing industries. But my gratitude became the weapon that destroyed beings whose only crime was believing that love and healing transcended species boundaries when guided by moral reasoning rather than the competitive cruelty that characterized institutional responses to vulnerability requiring assistance rather than exploitation. September 23, 1980, marked our 47th day of homelessness since losing our apartment to medical bills that had consumed every resource available to a single mother whose textile mill wages couldn't cover both rent and the cancer treatments that were keeping Amy alive, while systematically destroying our family's economic stability through costs that exceeded anything welfare assistance could supplement. We'd been sleeping in our 1973 Ford Pinto, moving between rest stops and abandoned campgrounds while I searched for employment that would accept someone with no fixed address and 3 children requiring constant supervision. The Great Smoky Mountains had become our final refuge after being evicted from every public facility and charity shelter within driving distance, as park rangers could only order us to move along, rather than immediately calling social services to separate families, whose poverty made them unfit for child custody, according to governmental standards that measured parental adequacy through economic status, rather than love, dedication, or willingness to sacrifice everything for children's welfare. "Mama, I'm really hungry, and Amy won't stop crying," Tommy complained, while examining our last can of beans that represented the final food resource available until my next potential job interview in Gatlinburg, which was scheduled for the following Thursday. If our car could survive another week of mountain driving without mechanical failure, that would strand us completely. Amy's fever had been climbing steadily for 3 days, obviously the result of missing medications that required prescriptions we couldn't afford, and medical supervision that was only available to families with insurance coverage or cash payments that exceeded what unemployed single mothers could provide, through whatever resources remained after housing, transportation, and food expenses consumed every available dollar. "I think Amy needs to go to a hospital," Jessica said with the 9-year-old wisdom that came from watching her mother struggle with impossible choices between keeping families together and seeking medical care that might save sick children, but would certainly trigger governmental intervention that separated poor families whose circumstances exceeded what social services considered adequate for child welfare. But hospitals required insurance information, emergency contact numbers, and fixed addresses that verified family stability, while emergency room visits generated bills that would follow us forever, while creating documentation that might alert social services to investigate living conditions that could result in losing my children to foster care systems that prioritized economic standards over emotional bonds. The sounds outside our car at 11:30 p.m. suggested large animals investigating territory for potential food sources or threats requiring evaluation, and my first concern was bears that might be attracted to our garbage or threatened by human presence in areas they considered exclusively their domain for foraging and territorial activities. "Stay quiet and don't move," I whispered to my children while gripping the tire iron that represented our only defense against wildlife that could kill unprepared families within minutes of deciding that humans represented either threatening competition or accessible nutrition during seasons when normal food sources were becoming scarce due to environmental pressures. but the movement patterns around our vehicle were too deliberate for random animal behavior, suggesting conscious evaluation of our situation, rather than simple investigation of unusual territory occupation. The sounds indicated someone much larger than human, walking with careful stealth that demonstrated both awareness of our presence and obvious intent to assess, rather than immediately threaten whatever circumstances had brought 3 children and their mother to sleep in broken automobile in wilderness areas designed for recreational rather than residential use. "Small ones are sick," came a voice that was deep but unmistakably gentle, speaking English that was accented but perfectly clear, despite vocal apparatus that was obviously adapted for different atmospheric conditions than human linguistic development. "Mother seeks healing for little one whose body fights sickness that human medicine cannot cure when families lack resources for proper treatment." Cedar emerged from forest shadows like something from protective mythology, but whose immediate focus was obviously Amy's medical crisis, rather than any threat assessment about encountering beings whose existence challenged official understanding of what kinds of consciousness might inhabit wilderness areas that were supposedly well documented by scientific research and park management agencies. "Please don't hurt us," I said, while positioning myself between whatever was approaching and my children, understanding that maternal protection required courage that exceeded my terror about encountering something that belonged in folklore, rather than practical emergency situations that I was completely unprepared to manage through conventional safety protocols or emergency preparedness. Cedar's approach revealed physiology that combined obvious human intelligence with features adapted for mountain environment survival that suggested evolutionary development under conditions completely different from anything human populations had experienced. He was enormous, easily 8.5 feet tall with proportions that indicated overwhelming physical power. But his movements were careful and obviously protective, rather than aggressive. "Little one burns with fever that will take life unless treated with medicine that grows in places human doctors cannot find," Cedar observed while kneeling beside our car with movements that revealed both medical knowledge and obvious experience treating serious illness through methods that exceeded anything conventional pediatric care could provide in wilderness conditions. "Amy has leukemia, and we can't afford her medications anymore," I admitted while studying Cedar's responses for signs of aggression or evaluation that might indicate whether his presence represented additional danger or potential assistance from sources whose capabilities exceeded anything human institutional support could provide for families whose poverty had eliminated access to conventional medical care. "Mountain healing can help blood sickness when human medicine fails," Cedar said with authority that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both Amy's specific condition and treatment approaches that exceeded anything I'd learned about leukemia management through months of hospital consultations and specialist appointments that had consumed our resources while providing limited hope for long-term survival without continued expensive intervention. His eyes held depths of compassion and medical knowledge that were immediately recognizable, despite alien appearance that might have triggered panic responses based on cultural conditioning about what constituted dangerous versus helpful encounters with unknown entities whose existence challenged everything I thought I knew about what kinds of beings might choose to provide assistance rather than exploitation when strength encountered vulnerability, requiring protection rather than domination. The transformation of our desperate homelessness into something approaching family sanctuary began with Cedar's treatment of Amy's advancing leukemia, as his knowledge of mountain pharmacology and pediatric healing exceeded anything human medicine had provided, despite months of expensive specialist consultations and chemotherapy protocols that had consumed our resources while offering limited hope for long-term survival without continued treatments that required insurance coverage we'd lost with my textile mill employment. Cedar's approach to healing combined sophisticated understanding of medicinal plants with intuitive knowledge about childhood illness and family trauma that revealed someone whose experience encompassed both medical intervention and community support for families facing circumstances that exceeded their individual capacity for survival. His treatment of Amy was simultaneously clinical and nurturing, addressing biological crisis while providing emotional security that helped our entire family begin recovering from months of terror about losing our home, our health, and potentially each other. Blood sickness comes from poison that lives in places where healing cannot reach without plants that grow only in mountain places where old knowledge still remembers how to cure what human medicine cannot fix. Cedar explained while preparing herbal medicines from vegetation he gathered during systematic foraging expeditions that revealed encyclopedic knowledge about Smoky Mountains ecology and pharmaceutical properties of flora that conventional botany had never adequately documented or understood. But Cedar's assistance extended far beyond Amy's immediate medical crisis, as he gradually introduced us to his extended family, a community of beings who'd been living in Great Smoky Mountains for generations, while maintaining careful concealment from human detection through territorial knowledge and survival techniques that exceeded anything park rangers or wildlife management agencies suspected might exist in wilderness areas that were supposedly comprehensively monitored and scientifically understood. Mountain people help families when valley people abandon children to sickness and hunger, explained Willow, Cedar's mate, whose understanding of human social systems revealed decades of observation about institutional failures that created homelessness and medical bankruptcy for families whose only crime was lacking adequate resources for survival in economic systems that prioritized profit over human welfare. Your kind often forgets that caring for young ones requires whole communities working together, not just parents struggling alone against problems too big for individual solutions. The shelter they constructed for our family was extraordinary. A multi-room dwelling built into natural rock formations that provided complete concealment from aerial surveillance, while offering comfort and safety that exceeded anything conventional housing could have provided for families facing circumstances similar to ours. Their engineering incorporated both practical wilderness survival techniques and architectural innovations that created living spaces beautiful enough to feel like permanent homes rather than temporary refuges. Their children, 3 young beings named Sage, River, and Stone, whose ages roughly corresponded to Jessica, Tommy, and Amy, became siblings whose integration into our family structure challenged everything. I thought I understood about consciousness, learning, and what relationships could become when built on mutual acceptance rather than biological similarity or social expectations about appropriate family composition and development. Human children learn through competition and individual achievement, observed Oak, Cedar's brother, while teaching my children about forest ecology, weather prediction, and survival techniques that combined practical knowledge with philosophical insights about cooperation and community responsibility. Mountain children learn through understanding their place in larger systems that include all living beings, which creates wisdom about working together rather than trying to succeed by making others fail. The educational opportunities they provided encompassed everything from advanced mathematics and scientific observation to artistic expression and moral reasoning that exceeded anything conventional schooling could offer, through standardized curricula designed around competitive grading rather than collaborative exploration of consciousness and individual potential for growth. Learning becomes meaningful when it helps beings understand how to contribute to collective welfare. Sage taught Jessica while demonstrating plant cultivation techniques that could feed families through sustainable agriculture, rather than dependence on economic systems that created poverty and hunger for those whose circumstances prevented adequate participation in competitive markets. Amy's recovery under their care was nothing short of miraculous, as mountain medicine gradually eliminated cancer cells, while strengthening her immune system through treatments that addressed root causes, rather than simply managing symptoms through procedures that often created additional health problems, while failing to provide genuine healing that restored complete wellness. Valley medicine fights sickness by attacking body with poisons that kill both sick parts and healthy parts, Willow explained while monitoring Amy's progress through recovery that exceeded anything human oncology had predicted was possible, given her advanced condition and previous treatment failures. Mountain medicine helps body remember how to heal itself by removing things that prevent natural recovery and providing things that encourage life to flourish rather than merely survive. The seasonal celebrations and daily routines we established around their community created family traditions that honored both human and mountain cultural practices, developing customs that belonged uniquely to our extraordinary extended household, while teaching all our children about consciousness, cooperation, and moral reasoning that transcended species boundaries through shared values about protection, learning, and mutual support. Families include whoever chooses to love and protect each other, Stone told Amy while teaching her about plant identification and medicinal preparation that would ensure she could maintain her health through natural methods that didn't require expensive medical interventions or insurance coverage. Blood families are just one way beings can be connected, but chosen families are often stronger because they're based on decision rather than accident. By 1985, our mountain community had become proof that healing and prosperity were possible when beings chose cooperation over competition, sharing over hoarding, and collective welfare over individual advancement. My children were thriving physically, intellectually, and emotionally in ways that conventional single parenthood could never have achieved through individual effort and limited resources. "We're the luckiest family in these mountains," Amy declared during one of our evening gatherings around fires that provided warmth and light, while our combined families shared stories, music, and knowledge that created bonds stronger than anything biology or legal documentation could establish through institutional recognition rather than chosen love. Living with the secret of Cedar's family and their mountain community meant that our existence operated under constant awareness that discovery would destroy not only our sanctuary, but the beings whose generosity had saved my children's lives when human civilization abandoned us to poverty and medical bankruptcy. By the early 1990s, maintaining absolute secrecy had become increasingly complex, as Jessica, Tommy, and Amy developed exceptional capabilities that attracted attention from teachers, medical professionals, and social services personnel who noticed that formerly homeless children now demonstrated health, intelligence, and emotional stability that exceeded anything conventional intervention could have achieved. The challenge was both practical and psychological, as my children's remarkable recovery and development required explanations that couldn't reveal the source of healing and education that had transformed their lives from desperate survival to extraordinary flourishing. Amy's complete remission from terminal leukemia particularly attracted medical attention from researchers studying spontaneous cancer recovery and alternative treatment modalities that might explain seemingly impossible healing outcomes. Amy Thompson's case represents one of the most dramatic cancer remissions we've documented in pediatric oncology, reported Dr. Sarah Martinez, the specialist who'd been monitoring Amy's condition since we resumed medical checkups after establishing legal residence and employment that allowed normal healthcare access. Her recovery exceeds anything conventional treatment protocols could have achieved, and her current health parameters suggest therapeutic intervention that transcends available medical understanding. Cedar's wisdom about gradual integration into human society had prepared us for exactly this kind of institutional curiosity, as he understood that miraculous healing would inevitably attract investigation from medical professionals whose training required them to identify and document treatment modalities that might benefit other patients facing similar conditions. Mountain medicine works slowly, so valley people won't notice changes that happen too fast for human understanding, Cedar had warned while teaching us about managing our transition back to conventional society. Healing that appears sudden creates questions that lead to hunting parties seeking sources of medicine that threaten those who provide help to families that human institutions abandon to suffering and death. But the most dangerous development was Amy's innocent honesty about her recovery experiences, as her 8-year-old psychology hadn't fully developed the discretion necessary for protecting family secrets that required adult understanding about institutional responses to phenomena that challenged official medical knowledge and treatment protocols. "The mountain people gave me special medicine that made the cancer go away," Amy told Dr. D. Martinez during routine follow-up examinations that were supposed to monitor her continued remission while documenting recovery mechanisms for potential research applications. "They knew about plants that could fix my blood when regular doctors said I was going to die, and they taught my mama how to keep me healthy without expensive medicines that made our family poor." Dr. Martinez's response revealed the institutional curiosity that would ultimately expose our mountain family to federal investigation, as her medical training required reporting unusual circumstances that might indicate access to undocumented treatment resources or alternative healing modalities with potential applications for advancing cancer research and pharmaceutical development. Mrs. Thompson, Amy's descriptions of her treatment suggest exposure to medicinal knowledge that isn't available through conventional resources, Dr. Martinez observed, while documenting Amy's testimony for medical records that would eventually reach federal agencies monitoring civilian access to advanced biological or pharmaceutical technologies. If your family has been receiving assistance from individuals with advanced medical knowledge, that information could be valuable for developing new treatment approaches that might benefit other children facing similar conditions. My response revealed the grateful naivety that would ultimately destroy the beings who'd saved Amy's life and provided our family with 18 years of security and love that human civilization had denied us through economic systems that abandoned children to poverty when their parents couldn't generate adequate profit for medical and housing industries. We did receive help from people who understand natural healing in ways that exceeded anything conventional medicine could provide. I told Dr. House Martinez with appreciation that demonstrated my complete failure to recognize that institutional appreciation would inevitably lead to investigations designed to identify and capture sources of knowledge that might represent either security threats or strategic opportunities requiring governmental management. Dr. Martinez's professional enthusiasm was immediately aroused by confirmation that I was describing access to medical knowledge that exceeded official understanding, and her institutional obligations required sharing such information through channels designed to advance American pharmaceutical capabilities, while ensuring that valuable resources didn't remain under civilian control without proper scientific evaluation and regulatory oversight. Mrs. Thompson, if you've established contact with individuals who possess advanced knowledge about cancer treatment and natural medicine, that represents potentially groundbreaking medical discoveries that need to be evaluated by qualified researchers. Dr. Martinez explained with bureaucratic excitement that made sharing sensitive information far more dangerous than I realized at the time. My detailed descriptions of Amy's healing process and our family's relationship with mountain healers provided exactly the kind of intelligence that federal agencies had been seeking to validate reports about civilian access to advanced medical knowledge that might indicate either foreign technology transfer or contact with undocumented entities requiring immediate governmental intervention and strategic assessment. The Thompson case suggests civilian access to medical technologies or biological knowledge that exceeds documented research capabilities. Dr. Martinez reported to federal authorities who specialized in investigating unusual medical outcomes that might represent national security implications or strategic research opportunities requiring immediate capture and exploitation. Within months, our 18 years of perfect sanctuary had been compromised by my grateful cooperation with medical professionals, whose documentation and investigation processes would provide federal hunting teams with exactly the information they needed to locate beings whose only crime was choosing to heal children when human medicine had given up hope while demanding payment that destroyed families through medical bankruptcy. The investigation that would ultimately expose Cedar's community began with routine surveillance of our legal residence, as federal agents systematically documented our family's unusual health outcomes, educational achievements, and resource patterns that suggested ongoing contact with sources that challenged official understanding of what kinds of medical and technological assistance might exist beyond governmental oversight and institutional control. April 15th, 1998, dawned misty and cool in the Great Smoky Mountains, with Tennessee air that carried the scent of spring wildflowers, while I watched through our cabin windows as federal vehicles surrounded our mountain property in formations that demonstrated both overwhelming governmental authority and obvious intent to capture beings whose 18 years of generosity would end in systematic study by people who saw consciousness as strategic resources rather than individuals deserving recognition through relationships that had proven healing and community-transcended species boundaries. The operation was coordinated through real-time intelligence that combined Dr. Martinez's medical reports about Amy's anomalous cancer remission with satellite surveillance, confirming unusual large primate signatures that made nearly 2 decades of perfect concealment irrelevant in the face of technology designed to detect and capture every form of consciousness that challenged institutional understanding of medicine and family structures. Margaret Thompson, you are under federal investigation for harboring unknown biological entities that represent potential threats to national security and medical advancement. Agent Harrison announced through amplified speakers while his teams established perimeter control with equipment designed for capturing beings whose capabilities exceeded human defensive understanding. All entities will be detained for comprehensive scientific evaluation, and your family will be processed through federal debriefing facilities for assessment of your 18-year interaction with these subjects. My response revealed both the depth of love our family had developed with Cedar's community and my complete inability to comprehend that institutional power valued strategic advantage over relationships that had demonstrated healing and protection transcended every boundary except governmental authority that treated beneficial consciousness as security threats requiring immediate elimination through capture and systematic exploitation. Their names are Cedar, Willow, Oak, Sage, River, and Stone. And they've been our family for 18 years. I called back, while Jessica, Tommy, and Amy positioned themselves between federal agents and the beings who'd saved our lives when human civilization abandoned us to homelessness and medical bankruptcy. They healed my daughter when your doctor said she was going to die, and they taught us that community and love exist in forms that challenge every assumption about consciousness and what it means to build relationships based on choice rather than biology or economic status. But Agent Harrison's response revealed institutional mindset that made negotiation impossible and tragedy inevitable. Ma'am, you've been harboring what appears to be unknown hominid species, whose existence represents both potential biological threats and strategic medical research opportunities that require federal management, regardless of whatever emotional attachments your family has developed during unauthorized cohabitation. Amy's breakdown as federal agents prepared containment equipment was complete and devastating, as she understood that the mountain people who'd saved her life and taught her about healing were being classified as dangerous research subjects rather than recognized as the most caring family members she'd ever known. Cedar and Willow taught me that healing comes from love and plants that grow when people take care of each other. They're not dangerous. They're the kindest people who ever lived, and they saved me when I was dying because nobody else cared enough to help a poor family. Cedar made the choice that defined the end of our story and demonstrated the moral courage that had characterized everything about his relationship with our family for 18 years of choosing our welfare over his community's safety, despite understanding that contact with humans inevitably led to capture by institutions that treated consciousness as property rather than wisdom deserving. Protection through relationships based on mutual respect and voluntary love. Margaret, Jessica, Tommy, Amy, remember what we taught you about choosing compassion over fear when faced with beings who use power to create harm rather than healing, Cedar said with the dignity that had made him the most extraordinary father and healer any family could imagine, while federal agents prepared tranquilizer weapons designed for subduing large, dangerous mammals. Real strength protects those who cannot protect themselves, even when protection requires personal sacrifice that exceeds apparent capacity for survival. Our 18 years together proved that healing and community can transcend biological boundaries when beings choose love over the competitive suffering that characterizes much human institutional behavior. Agent Harrison's final orders revealed the systematic dehumanization that characterized federal responses to consciousness that challenged governmental control over information about medical knowledge and healing modalities. Subjects demonstrate advanced medical knowledge and sophisticated understanding of biological systems that will require comprehensive analysis under controlled laboratory conditions, without civilian interference, that compromises scientific objectivity and pharmaceutical research objectives. What followed was the destruction of everything that had made the previous 18 years the most secure and loving period of our lives. Cedar's entire family, 6 beings who demonstrated that healing and community existed in forms that exceeded human institutional understanding, were tranquilized despite offering no resistance, except verbal expressions of love for the humans they'd protected since we were facing starvation and medical crisis that conventional systems had failed to address through adequate social support. Tommy's rage as they loaded his mountain siblings into transport vehicles designed for dangerous wildlife created psychological trauma that would affect his development for decades. As he watched the family who'd taught him about cooperation and natural healing, systematically betrayed by the same civilized institutions that had failed to protect our biological family from poverty and medical bankruptcy before Cedar's intervention made prosperity possible through community support rather than individual competition. Cedar, Willow, remember our promise that families protect each other forever. Jessica screamed, while restraining personnel prevented family contact during capture operations that treated 18 years of interspecies love as irrelevant to strategic objectives that prioritized medical research over ethical consideration of beings whose only crime was choosing to heal children when human medicine had demonstrated complete failure to provide adequate care without destroying families through economic exploitation. Agent Harrison's post-capture briefing revealed that Dr. Martinez's medical documentation had provided exactly the intelligence federal agencies needed to locate and capture beings whose existence represented opportunities for studying advanced healing knowledge, while eliminating evidence that might validate civilian access to medical treatment that exceeded official pharmaceutical understanding and institutional control over healthcare resources. For 26 years, I've lived knowing that somewhere in underground research facilities, the souls who demonstrated that healing should serve love rather than profit have spent their remaining years as laboratory subjects being studied by people who will never comprehend that they're torturing beings whose wisdom about medicine, community, and family transcended anything their institutions could imagine. The emphysema killing me is justice for someone whose gratitude destroyed the most generous beings, whoever chose to demonstrate that healing and prosperity were possible when consciousness encountered consciousness through cooperation rather than competition. Proving that institutional forces valued strategic advantage over relationships that showed medical wisdom and community support existed in forms our civilization had never been brave enough to acknowledge or defend.